just 1 more minute. Thank you so much. We're going to wait just 1 more minute and then we'll get started. Thank you so much for attending. Okay, I think we should get started and we'll just let people in as they file in. So good afternoon, everyone. And on behalf of our president, Ms. Alexandra Maloney, who unfortunately could not make it today, and the VP of Business and Economic Development, Cal Williams, who's on the call today, I welcome you to today's BPIA Executive Fireside Chat series. Just to talk about BPIA before we get into the program, for those who are not familiar with the organization, BPIA is Black Professionals International Affairs. It's an educational, charitable, nonprofit membership organization that was founded in 1989 to increase the involvement of African American and other people of African heritage and other underrepresented minorities in international affairs. So if you fall into one of those categories and you're interested in joining or even learning more about the organization, please head onto our website. It's iabpia.org. So now we move on to the program. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome our guest today. Usually when we have these type of webinars, we don't really dwell on people's bios, but this is exactly the point of today's chat. And I'd like us to just appreciate for 2 minutes her achievements so far. And Navalayo Osembo is the co-founder and CEO of Enda Athletic Inc. She's a graduate of the London School of Economics and has worked internationally, including in the US, the UK, Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Kenya, where she utilizes her diverse skills as an accountant, lawyer, risk manager, and international development professional, which is something that's very familiar to us. Navalayo comes from a town near Eldoret in Kenya that has produced generations of the world's greatest distance runners. We know all of them. Prior to creating Enda Athletic Inc., she started a sports academy in Bungoma, Western Kenya, to provide sports prodigies from disadvantaged backgrounds access to much needed professional training without compromising their education. In order to maximize social impact in Kenya through sports, Navalayo teamed up with her co-founder to create Enda, a made in Kenya running shoe brand that creates jobs, invests in local communities, and spurs economic development through exports. Navalayo is a recipient of numerous awards, including second runner-up for the 2021 Africa's Business Heroes Award by the Jack Ma Foundation, Kenya's top 40 under 40 women, the SCORE World Forum's Emerging Leader, the Builders of Africa's Future Award, amongst others. And she's also a TEDx speaker. Wow, what a bio. Karibu. Navalayo. My Swahili is horrible. I tried. Karibu.
Thank you very much. You're doing just fine. Thank you for the intro.
And welcome to BPIA's Executive Fireside Chat series. We're really looking forward to hearing about your journey and to learning from you. Now, the formats of this chat would be you and I will have a discussion for the next 21 minutes. And then after that, we'll open it up to the audience to ask you questions about your journey, about your background, and mostly, something that is very near and dear to our hearts at the Business Economic and the Economic Development Committee is entrepreneurship. Okay. And so I hope you would be ready to share with us all of that. So let me start and, just ask you a couple of my questions.
Sure.
So we've heard a bit about your background and wow. Please, can you walk us through the part that says accountant, lawyer, risk manager, and international development professional? So what is your professional background, and when did you decide to leave all of that to become an entrepreneur?
Yeah, so I'll say a lot of my professional background has been based on interest rather than a traditional career path. And I think that's what makes it different. Different phases of my life, there were different influences that made me pursue certain things. So, for example, back then in Kenya, when you finished your high school, you had to wait for like 2 years before university placement. And so when I finished my high school, my brother was an accountant already. And so he was like, in these 2 years, you should do accounting because, it's like a skill that everybody needs. It doesn't have to have it. And it's been super helpful in my career. So that's how I joined accounting as I waited to start my law degree. And then once I started my law degree, I was finishing my accounting classes. I joined just after I had finished, and there was an internship program at Deloitte, and so I applied for it very early on, and I was accepted, and so I was placed in the risk management department. And so I ended up doing risk management. It started as an internship. I ended up doing it for the full length of my undergraduate. And so by the time I finished, I felt like I had, I was really part of Deloitte staff, only an intern for 4 years or so. And so I joined the staff to kind of continue with risk management. At that particular point, I had the option to either pursue law or continue with risk management, but I felt like I'd already made the professional connections to continue with that line of path. But after doing that for a couple of years, I felt like I was doing the same thing over and over again. And I remember that I really liked international law. And so I decided to go back to school and pursue. I was like, maybe I missed something. I felt like I really enjoyed that. And so that's how I applied to study international development. And then I got into the London School of Economics. And once I left there, I got a job at the United Nations, which was more in, humanitarianism and development. And it was also at that particular moment that I was really inspired to build sports. Sports has always been in my background, and I was thinking we need to do more, especially when you look at the ability of it as an industry to contribute to the GDP. And so I started, at that particular time when I was in London, I had a lot of exposure to tennis. And so it kept me asking, like, why aren't there Africans in the top 100 ATP listing? Why? We're very athletic, but somehow in this particular sport we're missing. So that led me down a rabbit hole, and I decided to fix it. Now I know, the challenges, but back then I was like, we kind of need to fix this. And I started a tennis academy immediately I finished my master's degree. I went home, started the tennis academy, which was the same time I got the job at the UN. And so trying to do that from a long distance was very challenging. And so it didn't work out as anticipated. I had to close it down after 2 years. And once I closed it down, the next question was, okay, I've had all this experience. I've learned about sports. I've seen all the challenges. Maybe tennis is not it. What's the next phase? And so I decided to go to look for, I was literally just Googling for business accelerators. I wanted someone with skill and experience to tell me what's wrong with my business idea. And that's how I went to a business accelerator. And I think I always remember they were like, wow, tennis, okay. Like I gotta do that in rural Africa. But they helped me think through what I wanted to achieve in sports, and running was the conclusion of that whole process. That, running is much easier to enter. It's something that Kenya is very well known for. Can you try to do something in running? And then it was, what do you do in running? You can either do apparel or footwear or nutrition. But of course, I was like, footwear, because that's the tool that the athletes need. And again, looking at the market size of the athletic footwear industry, it just looked like it was, it just felt like the right opportunity. And that's how I ended up in the footwear industry.
Okay, wow. I mean, that is quite a journey. And what I get from what you said is that, you have a lot of interests. And I think you may have leveraged off of your interests to actually go into what you did, but also not just going in blindly, right? You did the market research. You spoke to people, you sought out advice and opinions. how much have people advised, and maybe do you have any mentors that have kind of helped you throughout the process and held your hand at some point?
Yeah, I think that's something I've been very lucky with. I've gotten mentors all throughout. When I was actually thinking about that yesterday, and I was like, wow, I've been very lucky in terms of the people who I'd say God has placed in my path. So for example, when I was at Deloitte, there was a partner there who, for me, that was the first time I saw a fully professional woman, like in charge and, owning it. And I always remember she was always telling me, like, because at some point, I remember there's once I was due for a promotion and I was like, oh my God, I don't want to because I'm going to be this young kid over this older people. I'm not ready to do this. And I remember her telling me, like, but why does that matter? Like, it's your performance. You should never ever let your age be something that says you can't do X, Y, Z. And she was always pushing me to be like, is your work excellent enough? It's like, it's for you, it's not for other people. And so, in that phase of my life, she was a very good mentor in terms of, demanding the best of me. When I was at the UN also, I sought people who had been in the system for a really long time, especially when I was making the decision of, should I quit or should I stay? And I figured the best people to talk to are people who've been through this forever. And I always remember one of them telling me, like, you can always get another job, but you're not always going to be able to get a business to this level. So go do the business and then you'll come back. Whereas if I talk to my peers, they were like, no, don't resign. This is like the prime of your life and stuff like that. But I
Working
feel
for the
like,
UN.
yeah, the older mentors who had been there for a long time were like, if I was younger, I would have pursued my passion. So I felt like that gave me a lot of energy to continue. And even now, as I'm running the business, I have mentors who have been in the industry for a really long time, and the ones who are basically, giving me energy every day to be like, yes, this is a challenge, but it's not the end of the world. Here's how we can plan to overcome it. Here's how you can, achieve work-life balance and stuff like that. So I'd say mentors are a very, very strong element of my life, but mostly because I feel like half the decisions I make scare me, or they're the
Yeah.
things that I'm like, should I not? But mentors have always been that grounding thing that brings you back to earth and say, think of the future, don't think about the fear, and focus on what is, like, just focus on you, don't focus on the fear. And so yeah, I'd say me and my mentors are, very tight, and I appreciate them very much.
Those are such gems, right? Because we always think that we can do it, and not that you can't. I mean, it's always, I think for me, very comforting to have people in the corner, people just, saying, go for it. And as they say, if your dreams don't scare you, they're not big enough. So, I mean, you've dreamed big. Now, before we get into sort of Enda and how it all started, I just wanted to ask one question that will probably permeate into what we talk about. How much do you think, and you could say not at all, or positively, negatively, has your age and even gender influenced your path and, opened or shut doors? Like, I mean, I guess, what do you think about that?
I genuinely feel at different phases of my career, age has been a different factor. So as I mentioned, when I was starting out, I was very scared of leading teams with people who are older than me, even though, I was given the opportunity. And at that point, I felt like, again, from a cultural perspective where, a certain age demands respect, it demands, and so having to have, that conflicting feeling of, am I going to order them around? It's not really ordering around, it's just having that level of work quality that says this is good enough for me. But sometimes that involves telling people to repeat something over and over again. I was very uncomfortable with that when I was younger. This is when I was just, like 4 or 5 years of undergraduate. But as I said, I had really good mentors who pushed me to own it and to be like, it's fine. Like, if they want to, they can perform at your level. If they're not, there's nothing wrong with them learning from you. I'd say that's the only thing, since then, I think I've been okay with the different areas of my life in terms of age and gender. I can't say that there's a particular point where I have felt discriminated, or I have felt like I'm not able to do something because of that. I'd only say the gender bit has been the recognition of the fact that I am able to do what I'm able to do because I have a really good life partner. And the fact that I've seen some of my friends have to sacrifice their career because they're not able to move locations, or they're not able to, make some sacrificial decisions. Like I've moved countries, continents, and I think one of the things that has been critical to my success is the fact that my family has been able to understand that I need to be at places, be at meetings, sometimes just, be away for some time. And I think for a majority of women, that's still not possible. It really depends on who's in your life, what's the structure of the family and stuff like that. So I'd say I have not had those limitations, but I've seen those limitations being realistic or having the impact of women, and their ability to fully show up, because you kind of show up, but you're like, oh, I have to go back. Like that sacrifice is high. But I'd say for myself, generally, I've been lucky enough to not have that be a barrier.
I mean, that is, I definitely, sort of, identify with that. I'm from South Africa. I'm living in Switzerland, and, the support of my partner has meant everything. And I remember the CEO of PepsiCo actually saying that one of the things that has sort of determined her trajectory as well is familial support. So, that's just such a big thing, especially for women.
Yeah.
Of certain ages.
Yeah.
That's okay. So now we're going to go into Enda. This is for me, I found your story, especially the company, just so inspirational. So there's just a couple of things that I would like you to touch upon. So when did it start, and who did you start it with?
Yeah, so Enda officially started in 2015 in November. So this is when
happy birthday, yeah.
Yeah, literally, I was looking at it now and thinking, oh my gosh, so many years have passed. But that was when, we kind of like registered in the US as an entity. We registered in Kenya in 2017. It took us 2 years to go from, like planning to actual production. It was much longer than we anticipated, but that's how life happened. When I started it with my co-founder. He's called Weldon Kennedy. And remember when I said after the tennis academy business failed, I went into the business accelerator, which is where the idea of kind of like turning into running became. And so when I was presenting my idea, my co-founder was one of the people who were in the audience, and like the idea and the message really resonated. And he was like an avid runner and also interested in development and social change. And once we got talking about it, it just felt like a really good fit. And so, he was like, yeah, I'm super interested in kind of like joining and being part of this. And we decided to kind of like start working together. But, from idea to actual product was 2017. So it took us about 2 years. And then, of course, the usual challenges of financing and getting money to be able to get started. We ended up doing a crowdfunding campaign on the internet, and that's how we basically got the money to get started. I'd say that's basically how we got started. And over time, we were able to get angel investors who I think are super critical in developing entrepreneurship, especially in Africa. And from there, we kind of just grew by product, by size, and by geographic places. Yeah.
So, I think you've heard this question probably a million times, but I think this is the beauty of your own company, is why was it so important for you to make the product in Kenya instead of, making them in China, making them in Vietnam, and saving a lot of money and probably a lot of hassle? So can you walk us through that?
Yeah, and I'd say like this answer has phases, because there's a phase of when I started the business, there's a phase when I was in the business, and now there's a phase when I'm trying to expand the business, and each has different challenges. But one of the things that, one of the things I took from development was that without the possibility of value creation, and especially from an African perspective, it's going to be very difficult to develop the continent. And so we export a lot of things, which are the same things that get imported back to us with a lot of value addition. And so, how do you change that? And then the other thing was also just looking at, similarly related, how we are always on the short end of the stick, if that makes sense. So you have, like, for example, footwear, $54 billion industry. The most, if you're looking at Kenya, the most we are getting is prize money for, less than 10 athletes. So we're getting like a significant lion's share. The rest are just getting, not too much money. And so the desire was, why not actually create something that has value addition and something that actually connects the running world to Kenya? Because, if, they always say the Kenyans are here, the Kenyans are running, of course, Ethiopians as well, but we've kind of like really got to own that space. And so that was the reasoning in terms of, what could be better than a made in Kenya running shoe, made in conjunction with Kenyan athletes and made in Kenya. And the idea was to really create value addition and see how that goes. As I say now, from an expansion perspective, it's really challenging. And one of the places where I'm thinking of how do we pivot the business, because if you're looking at the industry, you have a regular shoe manufacturer is basically ordering directly from Asia and getting back the goods and going to market quickly, whereas we are getting the raw material, taking them to Kenya, producing, and then it goes to different places. So it was taking us a really long time. And also, again, it was not an industry that existed. So we are training the workers. We are doing much more than what a traditional business would do, because we are basically saying we need to invest for the future. So those are also additional costs that, other people are not kind of like getting. So how do you merge that? Because the reality is that a business has to have demand and supply and efficiency, both at cost and operational level. And so, based on that, there's some shoes that we're going to be making outside of Kenya, some shoes we're making in Kenya. The goal, as I was, telling my team, and what I say is like, we're going north. We are going to deviate a little bit to northeast, but the idea is north. Because one of the things is, as we are also thinking of building a factory and doing all these things, first we need to upskill the workers. And then second, we need to have enough demand so that even if you're producing 10,000 pairs a day, those 1,000 pairs are going to a market that's kind of like being created. So it's still a long journey, but it's also, once you get into it, you understand the challenges of trying to create something. It's not just operational, it's taxes, it's the business environment, there's a lot of things. I would say I call them opportunities, not really challenges, because you see all the things that you could fix. And, and the idea for me is always, I think Enda is more like a pioneer, but I'm like, it needs to be that after us, any person who's starting a local business and going global should find an easy way to do it, or should find someone who can reference to, and they can say, hey, how did you guys get into the US? How did you guys get into Europe? Whereas for us, we had to spend a lot of time, researching and doing that, like by ourselves. So the key thing I'd say, I'm still very committed to, we have to have value addition, because I know we say this all the time, but we have to remember and remind ourselves that Africa really is the source of content, the source of a lot of resources. And this is despite centuries of exploitation, and we still have resources. Now, imagine what we could do if we actually just, get our acts together and do that. I am still very much committed to that.
I mean, what you say right now just resonates. And just a few weeks ago, we had an event on business opportunities investment in Africa. And this was something that was very, repeated time and time again. There has to be value addition in the continent. And so I am going to ask you, one of the last questions that I will ask, and then I'll turn it over to the audience. But one of the, purposes of that, the series of webinars that we're doing, trying to connect, Black people or people of African descent in business opportunities, is if I were a US-based or overseas-based company and I wanted to invest in Kenya, what, as you call them, what are the, the main opportunities? So because you've done the homework, right? Yeah. What are those main opportunities that I would have to prepare myself for, although knowing that they are, think, benefits to be gained. But what do you think as a US-based investor who wants to invest in Africa and Kenya? What should you be ready for?
I think one of the things, especially someone investing from outside, you kind of have to have boots on the ground. And by that, I mean local boots on the ground, because I feel there's a very huge disconnect when, again, you have a third party that's connecting you to an investor. So you basically have the investor and then a third party and then you. And I feel like there's some things that, are like, you kind of have to hear from the horse's mouth, right? Because I feel like sometimes the way the businesses are depicted or the way the challenges, I'm like, it's not necessarily correct, but there's usually not a person in the room who can say that's not right. Usually it will be someone who is also, foreign in a sense, kind of like. So basically, I'm like, if you're an investor and you are interested in investing in a specific industry, talk to the entrepreneurs in that industry. I know, sometimes an intermediary might feel like a safer and, more familiar option, but I think a lot of mistakes are made because the investors do not have direct linkages to entrepreneurs. And in between that, I'd say some capital is lost in the sense of the money that's kind of paid as an intermediary fee. And also there's a lot that's lost in interpretation. And then I'd also say familiarizing yourself with the language of finance at the local level again. So for example, the first time someone was asking me, can I see your cap table? And I was like, what is that? And it's just a very simple thing. But if you are not speaking the language of the entrepreneur, it's very easy to walk away and say, these guys don't know what they're talking about. They don't know the language of investment, which is very different from give me a list of everybody who owes some percentage of your company and how much percent. It's the same thing, but just different terminology and different languages. And then I would say also, it's a patience game. It's like a risk and reward thing, high risk, high reward. But again, even if you look at the data in terms of fastest growing market, fastest, growing economies, youth and stuff like that, Africa is the answer. So I'd say, from this perspective, I'd credit the Chinese, and I'm saying that kind of like going right in and kind of like taking the risks and reaping big rewards from it. But I would also say we don't have to be people who wait for others to come and reap those rewards. We can also kind of like do that for ourselves. And I'd say last but not least, there's also a really key area for African diaspora. So whether you're investing as diaspora or investing as, a foreigner, I think diaspora is a very critical element of information, sources of information. Diaspora have lived there, they have family there. They can find out for you, information that is absolutely like the real-time information can be found very easy, but a lot of these networks are not available online. It's a phone call, it's a WhatsApp message, it's something like that. So I think diaspora is a very key role in terms of generating revenue and investment in Africa for entrepreneurship.
That's very valuable information. And I think, in some places, especially, in some African countries, all this information does not live online, right? You can't just Google stuff, unfortunately. But yeah, talking to people is still very, very valuable. And I think that's a really, really good tip. So I am going to mute myself because I want to open the, the Q&A session and have people in the audience ask you questions. So please feel free to put up your hand and we can open the mic. If we can keep our questions very concise so that we can, have opportunity to hear from Navalayo. So I will take maybe 2 questions. Bryant, is there anybody else who would like to ask? Okay, let me not put anyone under pressure. Let's start with Bryant and then we'll move on as we go on. Thank you, Bryant. You have the floor.
My name is Bryant Ezeyamama Abubalu. I'm based here in Atlanta. I'm also
sorry, Bryant, I think your connection is unstable. Hello, Bryant. Your connection is unstable, so we
I'm
can't.
gonna go outside.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, give me 1 second. Hello, can you hear me better now?
Perfectly. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I was saying my name is Bryant. I'm a professional basketball player here based in the United States. I'm really interested in starting like a apparel and shoe line, but I'm highly interested. I want my products to be produced in Africa because I want to support the African economy. I've talked to a couple of people about this. I'm in touch with a professional NBA player, former NBA player, Festus Ezeli, who won a championship with the Golden State Warriors. I talked to him about uh, doing producing shoes in Nigeria. I talked to a manufacturer in Nigeria about producing shoes in Nigeria, and I talked to a designer who was based in California about designing the shoes, and she also has experience in a business aspect of producing fashion, producing clothing, and yeah. So I'm really interested I really would like to get in touch with Navalaya because I want to. I want as much as possible to bring this dream into fruition. I want to produce the sports apparel in Nigeria and to support the Nigerian. I know she's based in East Africa, and this is West Africa that I'm talking about. So I think it's a good opportunity to expand and collaborate. So that's what I want to say.
This is perfect. I mean, this is what this forum is also for. And if you have any reaction, Navalayo?
Yeah, I'm just gonna pop my email in the chat, and then we can kind of like get in touch. But I'd also say, it'll be cool. We can get in touch and talk about. I think one of the key things that I've learned is what it means to manufacture, because there's different elements. You can kind of like start with assembly, and then you can go into full production and stuff like that. And then it's also important to really understand the supply chain. I'd say give a thought into that, because then once that's what determines your cost, and that's what determines the viability of the product. But yeah, happy to catch up with specific questions afterwards.
Thank you so much. Maritza, you have the floor.
Hi, good afternoon, Kolo. As you mentioned, I'm Maritza Adonis. I serve as the Chief Executive Officer of MTA Visions, global corporate social responsibility government relations firm based in DC. I had a question about a question centering around how do we leverage the diaspora so that we can improve our economic activities between diaspora. What have you seen as some of the barriers to actually realizing that particular aspect that you mentioned?
So quite honestly, this is something I'm also thinking about, right? Like the reason I am seated right now in the US trying to figure out how do I bring diaspora together, because I think one of the key things that has happened, even at the diaspora level, at least from my experience, is you find we are still in country mode, right? So there's the Nigerians, like the Nigerians are very well organized, the Kenyans are organized, but we're still not. I think if there's something that happens that's about Africa or African American, then there's a collective voice. But in terms of social and other aspects, there's still a nationalistic aspect. And I think what I'm trying to figure out is how do we Pan-Africanize the diaspora? I feel like the diaspora actually understands the need for coming together, but the channels are still very nationalized. So how do we do that? Quite honestly, what I'm doing now is getting in touch with different diaspora organizations. But again, the challenge is I'm talking to them from an ender perspective. I'm not talking to them we don't have a collective where we're saying, here's us as, diaspora brands that need your support as a diaspora, or an organization that we can basically say, here's businesses that are in the diaspora that are looking for funding. There is one organization, it's called the Africa Diaspora Network. I think the ones I've seen that have at least managed to trying to bring that together. Just type that in the chat. So those are the guys that I'm kind of like in touch with, because I feel like they have this vision, but they've not been able to to do that yet in terms of, having a very strong voice and incorporating the millions of diaspora that are here. So it's a work in progress, and happy to connect to see how we can kind of do it. But I think, that's one area that I think if we're able to crack, then the issue of financing is done. The issue of marketing is it solves a lot of problems because there's strength in numbers.
I mean, what I'm hearing here is an opportunity, if somebody wants to create a platform, let's do it. Okay, so thank you so much for those two questions to start us off. Ladies and gentlemen, Navalaya is here. She is yours. Please feel free to ask questions. Is there anybody yet? All right, in the meantime, if I may jump in, I want to actually jump off what you said to Bryant. You say that there's many levels of manufacturing, one of them is assembly, you can either start from scratch, whatever the case may be. So what was your business model? Maybe it's changed now from the beginning until now. Do you own the factory? Do you outsource? So what was that? What did it look like?
Yeah, so one of the things, right now we outsource. And the reason why we outsource is, running a factory and running a business are two very different operating models. You can do it at a small scale, but the bigger it grows, I feel like a person who runs a factory is best left to run the factory, and the person who's building the brand is best left to do that. And also one of the other things is that it's not that it's impossible, it's been possible, but I think again, from a resource perspective, if you're getting, let's say I give you $1 million, I'd rather you put that $1 million into product and branding and doing that as opposed to building a factory, because then you're going to have the factory and then you won't have the capital to kind of run it and do that. So it's very important to understand first what are the resources available to you and for you. And then next to that, it's kind of looking at, okay, what is the supply chain, the value chain? Even though you're making the products in Nigeria, using Brian's example, where are you sourcing the raw materials from? Are they coming from South Africa, from Kenya? Are they coming from, Asia, Thailand, wherever it is they're coming from? What's that cost? What is the cost of importing? Do you have any, license, any incentives from government to maybe reduce taxes? What is the cost of manufacturing? And manufacturing starts with basic assembly, so which is just basically you're getting finished parts. So the stuff is still made in China, but assembled in Nigeria. And then there's also now finding out what is the percentage required, the rules of origin, which determine what is made in, so you have to understand what is made in Nigeria. Probably the revenue authorities would kind of let you know. And then you work towards that percentage. That's what we did for ENDA. For us, it was about, I think it was about 30%, can't remember now. And so saying, okay, looking at the whole production line, what do you need to do in Nigeria to get to that percentage that moves you from assembled in Nigeria to made in Nigeria? So it doesn't necessarily mean 100%. And you can kind of dwell on there for some time, and then now look at what does it mean to now transfer the whole value chain from Asia to Nigeria. And quite honestly, in my opinion, that's like a 10-year project in terms of moving everything to fully made. And again, for footwear, I'm speaking with regard to footwear again, because, it's footwear is like in Kenya, the components that are used to make the sole for the performance footwear, it's not there. That technology doesn't exist. And so we have to keep importing until we are able to do it ourselves. So it's kind of understanding that value addition, and then now coming back to the books of finance and seeing, if I assemble, what does that mean from a cost perspective? If I only make made in, what is that cost perspective? If I go 100%. And when you play with the numbers, I always feel like it's the one thing that, entrepreneurs focus on the dream so much and forget the numbers. But the numbers will give you a realistic story of, are you going to manufacture this or are you going to assemble this? Because again, you need the business to make enough money to kind of, to plow back into the business. So I'd say understand the supply chain and then go back to your financial model and create scenarios where you're saying, what happens if this happens and this happens? That will tell you the truth of whether, which path you should take, because it's down to what resources you have.
And I mean, now you're speaking my language. I'm an international trade lawyer. And when you talk about rules of origin, another thing that could affect how much and where you put your factory is whether you can get preferences.
Exactly.
When you're exporting, for example, to the US under AGOA, like how much of it needs to be, within that Chapter 9 bracket, for example, so exporting to the EU, whatever the case may be. So I fully appreciate that. It's something that you really have to think about it. And I really like what you said. Sometimes the dream is just so attractive, but when you crunch the numbers, it may or may not work the way that you're dreaming. Melvin, I see that you have your hand up. Please go ahead, sir. Hi, Melvin.
Hi. Oh, I didn't know you called on.
Oh, hi. Hello.
First of all, let me say it's a real pleasure meeting you. I've been reading about your shoe for a long time, and I'm a runner myself. I did 4 miles today.
Oh, wow.
Questions I have for you: how do you stack up against Nike and Hoka and all these other shoes that are proliferating here? There's not a heck of a lot of difference between them. Most of it's style as opposed to whether they make you run faster or jump higher or that kind of thing. Then another question I have, I'm involved, I run an organization called Constituency for Africa. And I've been involved in Kenya for many years. I worked with Raila Odinga on his campaign this year. And, anyway, but my question to you, I'm also working with the Atlantic Council and some others to help put together a forum on creative industries as part of the upcoming U.S.-Africa Summit in December here in Washington. And we were in Dakar in March, I believe it was, for the launch of the African Basketball League. And to meet a lot of the players on the continent, who are also, we're talking about fashion, we're talking about clothes, we're talking about food, we're talking about music. All of these things would generate jobs for this next generation coming up. And my question to you, are you involved in the summit at all? Do you know about it? Are you involved? It seemed to me after watching you for a long time, I've been watching you and I like the style of the shoe. I'm thinking about buying a pair. I really, just to test it out. I look at all these, every time we have a marathon here, who's winning? A Kenyan or Ethiopia. And they were thinking about blocking them at one point. They would say, oh, we should make this only Americans only. Well, I don't know if you have a reaction to any of that, but I appreciate you and thank you for this invitation.
Awesome. Thank you as well. I'd say, the running shoe industry is actually a very niche one. So people always assume Nike and Adidas are at the top of the running, specific in the running niche, but it's not. It's Brooks, it's Hoka, it's On. It's rather small brands compared to the rest of the performance footwear industry. And so one of the things that really motivates me on this journey, and one of the things that gives me, energy to continue, is the fact that a lot of these brands, especially in the running space, are less than 10 years old, at most like 12 years old. So Hoka is very recent, On is very recent, Vibram is very recent. So there are companies that have been, more than they're just about a decade old, which is not too far from where we are. And in terms of their trajectory, it's just been mostly, kind of testing the market, getting runners to be able to test them, which is even listening to you, I'm like on the right track, because it's about getting a runner to say, I'm going to try it out, right? And once a runner does that, then it's more of, the runner's friends asking, what are you trying out? Like, can we try that too as well? So this industry has those specific peculiarities that make it easier for newer brands to kind of check in. And as you said, the differentiation in shoes is not that much. It's really about, what's the small slight difference, whereas the Kenyan running brand is really, really strong. And so, we are kind of coming in from not only a branding perspective, but also kind of paying ode to how Kenyan athletes run. And I'd say, based on the fact that other brands have been able to crack it in the top 3 or top 5 with 10 years than less, I think Enda can be able to do that as well. And then in the sense of the Africa Summit, no, I was not aware about it. Happy to have more information. I've shared my email in the chat. Because as you said, the sports industry, a lot of us are looking at performance, but there's a lot of other opportunities that are about fashion, music, sports, arts. There's a whole ecosystem that supports it. And I remember watching the the Basketball Africa in Kigali, and I was like, where are we going? When are we seeing the drip by the athletes? Because that's part of the NBA culture. It's like, what's LeBron wearing, and stuff like that. But we still haven't gotten to that level at the African level yet. And I think if it's opened up to designers, we would be super surprised and super shocked by what designers can do. So I do believe that the NBA Africa League especially is going to be, a maker and changer of things. I think the key question is, I don't know, I think maybe it's a role for private sector to be like, can we help in this and this particular way? Can we be having, for example, brands lining up for the next championship so that, like players can have that element as well? But we've seen it happen in the US and other places, and I don't see why not that to happen in Africa as well.
All right, thank Kelly. I saw your hand up and you put it down, but I'm going to call on you anyway. Hello, Kelly. You want to ask your question?
Hi, hello, how are you?
Hi.
Nice to see you. Thank you.
So I've been following the discussions, and I actually came across the shoes recently when I was at the Standard Chartered Marathon. So it's really cool to be part of the call. My question goes to your comment on the rules of origin. And I also have a keen interest in international trade law. And there's a lot of trade agreements that are coming up in Kenya. So how do you see yourself leveraging those agreements maybe to access more African markets? Because right now I'd imagine that you face certain barriers accessing African markets more so than you do accessing other markets.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate thing, but I think we are working on changing it. I'm a really keen follower and believer of the Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement. And the reason for this is because, from a practical perspective, if that happens, I genuinely think it changes the entire economic structure of Africa. Other people have seen the opportunity as well, which is why you're seeing international companies kind of coming and setting up factories in Africa. It's not because it's because they see the opportunity. So we've been trying. Actually, I was kind of like one of the people who are testing, trying to see. Immediately it launched, I was like, okay, let's send something to South Africa. Let's see if actually it's working or not. Let's send something to Nigeria. So at least I would say it's not working yet, but the spirit of it, I believe, is in the right place. Having the, most of the African countries signing up. But I genuinely believe if implemented, it will be a huge, huge game changer, not just for the big businesses, but for the smaller businesses as well. For ENDA, we've taken advantage of the AGOA, Africa Growth, I forget the full name now, Opportunity,
yeah.
Yeah, we've taken advantage of Euro 1. So there's a lot of preferential things, but I think a lot of African businesses do not know how to leverage these things. You have a customer in the US, you don't know that, you have to go to the revenue authority, get a certain certification, and be able to not pay taxes on the other hand. So the one part is education, because these agreements exist. And the education is more like, hey, this exists and this is how you can be able to take advantage of it. But I'd say from our perspective, we're already taking advantage of those agreements. I just wish, I wish this information was more available so that people are starting businesses, not just with local in mind, but knowing that there's infrastructure that allows them to also sell in other countries.
Absolutely, and there are people like Kelly and Mary Ann on the call who would be happy to assist, with the preference part of it. So this is, this is somebody and something that we obviously can get, behind each other in these things. I see Mary Ann has opened the video. Would you like to have a question, Mary Ann?
I don't really have a question. Hi everyone. Thanks, Kolo, for putting me on blast. I don't really have a question. I think mine's probably just to say, Navalayo, your story is very, very inspiring from, very many perspectives. First, quitting, your job and moving into business, but also being a person who's juggling so many different roles, a mom, a partner, a business, a person running their own business, and also moving around different continents. I suppose you do that with ease, or it seems that you do that with such great ease. So it's very inspiring on very many levels. I don't want to raise questions pertaining to trade, which is my background, but I guess I'm more keen to know what keeps you up at night.
What keeps me up at night? That's actually an interesting question. It has phases. I'd say currently the business needs to expand and we need money for that expansion. And it's more of how do I fundraise for this amount of money? I think fundraising depends a lot on networks and stuff like that. And I think that's also one of the challenges of kind of coming from Africa is you kind of land and they're like, okay, I'm here. And you have to kind of like start from scratch in terms of, hi, my name is so and so, I'm trying to do this. So I feel like it's a little bit more difficult because I don't have the connections in terms of, you can kind of hear a company that's in Silicon Valley and has raised 250 million overnight. I don't have that capacity yet. So what keeps me awake at night is I know the expansion plans of the business, but it needs additional funding. And I'm trying to figure out how do I put that together. I'd say that's what's keeping me up currently.
I mean, this is when we hear this again, getting that network. And I think, BPIA can be part of that. We have everybody from everywhere. And I think it's something that, in the series that I was telling you about, a lot of people are very, excited about entrepreneurship. And so, if we can help you start the conversation, just call on us. And there's many people with many different connections here. And why not, right? Why not be part of that solution where we actually try to support our own businesses, not, walk the walk, not just, because it's all about, we're going to buy Black, we're going to buy Africa. But when the chips fall, sometimes we just don't put our money where our mouths are.
Cool. Thanks for that. Can I follow up?
Yes, absolutely. Please, please, please. Do we have any more questions at this stage? Okay, I'm going to take advantage and ask you, why do you think that the US was, well, first of all, what is your biggest export market? I'm going to assume the US, but why do you think the US was, the most, sort of open to your product?
I think the US was open for two reasons. One was the way we launched the company through online crowdfunding, because it's a very popular way of raising money in the US, not in Africa. In Africa, we use crowdfunding for social causes. And because we kind of felt like that was the only option we had, that's what we did. And majority of our customers ended up being from the US. So it was just serendipity in the initial instance. And then also from a market perspective, US, again, being a continent, technically, is the biggest running shoe market in terms of people who are buying running shoes, people who are joining races, the number of races, there's just the running shoe industry is really big here. But that said, my heart is still set on Africa, mostly because, the more I get into understanding running shoes and understanding why a good running shoe matters, and seeing guys going for the marathon and they're wearing very, like shoes that are not built for running. And I'm like, you're going to rack up hospital bills in future. Those knees and those hips, they need cushioning. And so I've been feeling of late, like I want to kind of like democratize running, in a sense, like you want to make sure people have access to quality footwear, people have access.
Hello? Okay, she is hanging right now. Let's just wait a bit. She'll probably pop back in. We lost you for a second. So you just said something amazing about democratizing running, and then we lost you. Can you just repeat?
Sorry about that.
No problem.
So I was saying of late, I've been also thinking about how, even though we kind of like started as an export shoe company, how do we spread into Africa and make running not a thing that is expensive, but a thing that people can do with safe gear, not running with shoes that are not meant for running, but making it accessible, making it affordable, and growing the brand within Africa. So yes, we started off with the US, but our next 3-year strategy is very African heavy, with a key of making the running shoes affordable.
That's amazing. I mean, I'm a runner myself. I mean, not elite. I like to run. So it would be great actually to try it out. I will. I'll put my, my money where my mouth is, right? On is made just up the road. I went to the factory in Zurich. Haven't yet used them, but that means I have to buy Ender before I buy On. All right. Yeah. I see Bianca has opened her video up. Did you have a question or? No. Okay. Sorry. I didn't want to put you on the spot.
Well, I will quickly ask, when you're doing businesses in the different African countries, how easy is to work with the local governments there?
One of the things that has been helpful is using other entrepreneurs. So, for example, I've been thinking about Rwanda a lot, kind of like looking there, and also Uganda quite a bit. And so it's been, I haven't officially kind of like done that, but I'd say it's been much easier dealing with someone who's already set up a business there, and all the questions I have, they have answers for. And so I'm like, okay, now I'm kind of like ready to kind of like go there. I feel like if you go, and this is also one of the reasons I moved from the US to Kenya, because I was sending emails, I was calling the official numbers on the website, no response, and sometimes you kind of just have to go and knock. So I'd say in Africa, there's still very much a culture of, face to face and having conversations. So to kind of like remove that barrier, it's easier to, find an industry that you're kind of like interested in. LinkedIn has been a very instrumental bit for me. I just reach out to people randomly. I'm thinking of doing this. What's been your experience and stuff like that. So I'd say focus on the country, like make a list of the countries you want to, and then, use people like us or the people in this forum to find an entrepreneur who's doing that, either in your industry or outside your industry. They will already have done that process. And so it's easier that way. You can still follow the official channel, but from my experience, it's better to kind of go through entrepreneurs who've already done it.
Absolutely. I mean, you kind of have to do both, right? You have to follow things up at the same time and just be prepared to follow up really a lot. But it happens at some point. All right. We have a few seconds left. Are there any takers before we end? What has been really an amazing, amazing conversation with Navalaya. Thank you so much. Okay, I will ask the final question, and then I will thank everybody for coming in. So, I mean, this is obviously the typical ending question. Where do you see yourself in 5, 10 years?
Definitely a global brand. We're aiming for the podium finish. As the athletes always say, you kind of have to be on the podium, So yes. As I said, other brands have done it, and I see us also being like a top running shoe brand. And that matters to me because that gives us more money to kind of like invest back home, to, open. I definitely want to be an angel investor because I have seen the challenges, and I'm like, we kind of need to create that wealth and kind of like spread it around. So I just want Ender to be there as a top 3 running shoe brand. Whether it's led by me or somebody else is another issue, but I definitely see the company getting there.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. And I mean, from your mouth to the universe, really, and wish you all the best. And we'll be watching your trajectory, which has been amazing so far. So thank you so much. Thank you, Navalaya. Thank you for honoring our invitation. I know I also was one of those people that just jumped out of nowhere.
It's appreciated. That's life.
Shooting my shot.
And it happened.
Thank you so much. Yeah, you were just so gracious to accept. And thank you to every single one who's been on this call today. I hope you were as inspired as I am. I hope you learned as much as I definitely did. And please let us follow up. Let us follow up that diaspora, plan of ours. Let's do it together. We can really help each other to grow. And when we all grow, I think we become even bigger. So let's do this. So thank you so much for attending, and have a good day. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.